Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, October 18th, 2024. President Joe Biden meets in Berlin with the leaders of Germany, France, and Great Britain, urging support for Ukraine in its war against Russia, and what he warned would be a very difficult winter, and saying the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar is an opportunity to seek a path to peace in the Middle East. President Biden has also awarded Germany's highest honor for his work on transatlantic relations. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin also speaks about the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East as he finishes a meeting with NATO defense ministers in Brussels. Both major U.S. presidential candidates, Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris, campaign in the battleground state of Michigan. Polls say that Michigan's U.S. Senate race is one of the closest in the country. We'll speak with Punchbowl News congressional reporter Max Cohen, who is in that state covering that race. And U.S. Ambassador to Japan Rahm Emanuel reflects as the Biden administration comes to an end on what's left still to do when it comes to U.S.-Japanese relations. Reuters reports that U.S. President Joe Biden urged the West on Friday to sustain its support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion as Kyiv faces a bleak winter, and a looming U.S. presidential election raises worries about the strength of Washington's own resolve. Biden was speaking to reporters before holding closed-door talks with allied German Chancellor Olaf Scholz during a swan-song one-day trip to Berlin to discuss matters ranging from Ukraine to the expanding conflict in the Middle East. That's the article from Reuters. Here's President Biden in Berlin.
Well, Chancellor Olaf, it's great to see you again. And I do apologize for having to cancel first time around, but we did have a crisis in our southeastern border with hurricanes and tornadoes. But we're here because Germany is my country's closest and most important of allies. When Putin launched his brutal invasion of Ukraine, you reminded us all why this alliance is so essential. Under your leadership, Chancellor, Germany rose to meet the moment. You showed the wisdom to recognize that this war marked a turning point in the history, an assault on the very principles that have protected peace and security in Europe for more than 75 years. And then you summoned the resolve to act, remaking Germany's foreign policy to reckon with new realities, to stand strong and steadfast with Ukraine. America and Germany are the two largest supporters of Ukraine in its fight for survival as a free and independent nation. As Ukraine faces a tough winter, we must sustain our resolve, our effort, and our support. And I know the cost is heavy, but make no mistake, it pales in comparison to the cost of living in a world where aggression prevails, where large states attack and bully smaller ones, simply because they can. Today, the Chancellor and I are going to discuss ongoing efforts to surge support to Ukraine's military, to shore up Ukraine's civilian energy infrastructure, which is under constant assault and bombardment from Russia, and to help Ukraine recover by unlocking the value of frozen Russian assets. I also want to recognize Germany's decision to spend 2% of your gross domestic product on defense. Please keep it up because it matters. Our alliance with Germany extends far beyond Ukraine and Europe. It's global. Today, the Chancellor and I will discuss regional security in the Middle East, including the ongoing domestic efforts regarding Lebanon and Gaza. The death of the leader of Hamas represents a moment of justice. He had the blood of Americans and Israelis, Palestinians, and Germans, and so many others on his hands. I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace, a better future in Gaza without Hamas. And I look forward to discussing Iran. Olaf and I spoke the morning after Iran launched 200 ballistic missiles at Israel earlier this month. With our G7 counterparts, we agreed to coordinate our response through sanctions and other measures. And that is what we have done. I'm grateful for Germany's cooperation in holding Iran accountable for destabilizing policies, including providing missiles and drones to Russia to use against Ukraine. And just this week, the European Union followed Germany, the UK, and France in sanctioning Iran's leading airlines. This followed our own oil sanctions. This coordination is going to have to continue. I also want to thank Germany for standing firm against the vicious surge of anti-Semitism, hatred, and extremism we're witnessing today, some of it fueled by foreign misinformation. As democratic allies, we have to remain ever vigilant against what I call the old ghost in new garments, ancient hatreds resurfacing. Our charge is to make sure that the forces holding our societies together and binding us in the common cause of human dignity and freedom remain stronger than the forces seeking to pull us apart. And finally, Chancellor, I deeply appreciate your partnership and the many times you've forsaken the easy choice to make the right choice. Your act of statesmanship and friendship has made possible a safe return and unjustly detained Americans and Germans and the reunion of brave Russian dissidents to their families. I want to thank you, thank you, thank you. I value our conversations, and I look forward to them, this one is particularly. And I really mean it. I want to thank you for your friendship, not only personally, but I don't see how we maintain stability in Europe and around the world without a tight German-U.S. relationship. And you're the leader to do it. Thank you.
President Joe Biden in Berlin, standing beside the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz before meetings with him and also meetings during his one-day trip with the French President Emmanuel Macron and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Associated Press article reads, with the U.S. presidential election just weeks away and the race extremely tight, there are worries that a victory for Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, could upset the relationships that Biden is hoping to pass on to Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee. Trump has an appetite for imposing trade tariffs on key U.S. security partners. He has expressed indifference to the security of Ukraine, refusing to say during a presidential debate if he wants the U.S. ally to win its war against Russia. He's voiced doubts about coming to the defense of NATO members if they come under attack. That was from an Associated Press article. The German president, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, alluded to the first Trump administration during a ceremony today where President Joe Biden received Germany's highest honor, the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit, for fostering transatlantic relations.
For Germany, the friendship with the United States has been, is now, and will always be existentially important. Existential both for our security and our democracy. And yet in this friendship there have been and always will be times of proximity and greater distance, times of agreement and times of discord. Even recently, just a handful of years ago, the distance had grown so wide that we almost lost each other. But, ladies and gentlemen, throughout the ups and downs of time, there have been people who have stood by the transatlantic relations no matter what. And chief among those people, Mr. President, is you.
German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier in Berlin at the ceremony to award President Joe Biden the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit. President Biden in his remarks saying we should never underestimate the power of democracy, never underestimate the value of alliances. This honor from Germany was also given to former U.S. President George H.W. Bush for his support of German reunification. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin finished up his NATO defense ministers meeting at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, where they discussed the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine. Secretary Austin posting on X, "We remain committed to supporting Ukraine's defense and providing the assistance they need to prevail against Russian aggression. We're standing strong with Ukraine today and for the long haul." Secretary Austin also held a news conference where he said that the death of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar removes a huge obstacle to a ceasefire and hostage release deal. Here's part of the news conference with Secretary Austin with questions on both the Middle East and Ukraine.
You are saying that Israel has an opportunity to end the war in Gaza, but Israel's prime minister is vowing today to keep fighting. Do you support Israel's new campaign to, quote, stop the axis of evil, end quote, as Netanyahu put it, or is Israel missing an opportunity here? And on Ukraine, President Zelensky told the Financial Times that a formal invitation to join NATO is the only way Ukraine can survive Russia's invasion. Do you agree with that assessment? And more broadly, do you endorse his victory plan? Thank you.
So which one of those questions do you want me to answer, Phil? All right, let's start with the question as to whether or not there is an opportunity available with respect to Gaza. Of course there is. And we would hope that we can work together to take advantage of that opportunity. The first thing, Phil, that we need to focus on is the return of the hostages. Again, you heard Prime Minister publicly state yesterday that anyone who has control of hostages, he would encourage them to return them, and again, I would hope that they would do so. Beyond that, I think there are other opportunities, and we'll see how things evolve. But clearly, there are opportunities for a change in direction, and we would hope that parties would take advantage of that, both in Lebanon, in Gaza, and in Lebanon. The second question was, as I recall, Phil, was about the victory plan and whether or not we endorse the victory plan. Again, the victory plan is President Zelensky's plan, and we're going to do everything that we can to provide the security assistance to support the president as he tries to accomplish his objectives. Now, what we all want to make sure that we continue to do is to link military objectives to strategic objectives, and that dialogue continues. And I just met with Minister Umerov today. We talked through a number of those things. Again, our focus is going to continue to be on doing everything that we can to support the victory plan. It's support President Zelensky. It's not my position to evaluate publicly his plan. We have been supporting him by providing security assistance in a major way for over 2.5 years. We're going to continue to do that.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. On that victory plan from the Ukrainian president, Voice of America reports that a day after President Zelensky presented the plan to European Union leaders and NATO defense ministers, the nation's allies are giving it qualified support, with one leader saying it will be reconsidered after the U.S. election next month. Zelensky's plan, which he unveiled to Ukraine's parliament Wednesday, calls first for an unconditional invitation to join NATO, along with the deployment of a non-nuclear deterrent to Russian aggression, among other points. He maintains the plan could end the war no later than next year. That was from Voice of America. Returning to Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's news conference at NATO headquarters in Brussels, another reporter asked him what the U.S. role might be in a post-war Gaza.
If there is a settlement in Gaza, is the Pentagon prepared to provide logistical support and military advice to an Arab-led stabilization force if there are no U.S. boots on the ground?
In terms of whether or not we would participate in any kind of stabilization efforts in Gaza, I think that that's going to require the contributions of a number of countries. Hopefully, countries in the region will step up. There quite possibly can be a part for the United States to play in that as well. What part that would be and what that would look like, Chris, we're going to have to work with our allies and partners to scope that out. And I certainly would not have any announcements to make on anything like that. The first step, though, is we got to get to some sort of ceasefire, and then we need to make sure that we're putting the right things in place to stabilize the area and provide for some sort of security going forward. But that's left to be defined yet.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at a news conference at NATO in Brussels. Jerusalem Post writes Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana thanked his U.S. counterpart, Congressman Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, for his personal involvement in assisting Israel throughout the war. In a Friday morning phone call, according to a spokesperson for Ohana, Ohana updated Johnson on details regarding the elimination of Sinwar, and discuss the expected implications. According to Ohana's office, the Knesset speaker also discussed the letter sent from Biden administration officials earlier this week, which warned the Israeli government of a 30-day timeline to improve humanitarian conditions in Gaza before military aid implications could have to be reconsidered under U.S. and international law. Ohana's office described this rhetoric of conditioning aid to Israel as morally wrong and signals to the terrorist organizations in the Middle East and their handlers in the Ayatollah regime that they have a chance to escape justice. That was reporting from Jerusalem Post, and House Speaker Mike Johnson posting on X, "Thank you, Speaker Ohana. America is proud to stand with Israel and the Jewish people." CBS News writes that President Biden spoke to reporters before departing Germany, and he said he had a good understanding of Israel's plans and timing for a response to Iran's recent attack. Back in Washington, the White House Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner was asked specifically about that in an interview with Jim Sciutto, CNN Chief National Security Correspondent at the Meridian International Center Summit.
I want to talk about Iran now because, of course, there's great anticipation about Israel's strike against Iran. And if the reporting is accurate that Israeli leaders have pulled back from some of the more aggressive targets, whether that be nuclear or oil facilities, when I was in Israel, including as those missiles were falling a couple of weeks ago, there was a great, from what I could tell, a great amount of support there for a maximalist response. So I wonder, can you shed any light on how and whether this was partly or largely due to administration cajoling that Israel moved back from, as far as we know, that level of attack?
So first off, Israel has now been attacked twice by Iran. On April 13th, by more than 100 ballistic missiles, and then again last week by more than 200 ballistic missiles. That has got to be the starting point for any of these conversations. No country would simply tolerate that sort of attack on their territory. And the United States, in an unprecedented way, directly defended Israel, obviously in close coordination with other partners and with the IDF itself, and successfully thwarted those attacks. So the question is, not the details and the contours of a response, but the fact that no country would willingly tolerate something like that, and the need to restore deterrence and defend their territory is paramount. It won't shock you, probably, that I'm not going to detail our discussions with the Israelis about what they may or may not do. I think that would be highly inappropriate. But what I will say is we have been engaged in those conversations. There is obviously going to be more to come, but our overall goal is not for this to escalate, but to bring this front to an end as quickly as possible in a way that establishes an appropriate degree of deterrence, because we cannot be living in a situation, certainly Israel can't be living in a situation where they're repeatedly attacked by ballistic missiles from a hostile actor.
The White House Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner, interviewed by Jim Sciutto of CNN, Chief National Security Correspondent at the Meridian International Center Summit in Washington, D.C. today. Iran's foreign minister said today that Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, killed by Israeli forces in Gaza, is an inspiration for militants fighting Israel across the Middle East. The statement says his fate, beautifully pictured in his last image, is not a deterrent but a source of inspiration for resistance fighters across the region, Palestinian and non-Palestinian. The cause for liberation of Palestine from occupation is more alive than ever. This is Washington Today. Turning to the U.S. presidential election, from the Detroit News, Vice President Kamala Harris expected to take the stage at a rally in West Michigan Friday afternoon as both the Democratic and Republican presidential campaigns blitz the state this weekend. Harris, the Democratic presidential candidate, set to speak at Riverside Park in Grand Rapids before making stops in Lansing and Oakland County later in the day. She also plans to campaign in Detroit on Saturday, the first day of early in-person voting in the city. Former President Donald Trump, the Republican presidential candidate, expected to begin his day near Detroit Friday afternoon before making a stop in Oakland County and ending the day with a rally at Huntington Place in Detroit Friday night. That was all the reporting from the Detroit News. Both candidates spoke to the press today. We start with Kamala Harris right before that rally in Grand Rapids.
Hi, guys. Well, we're back in Michigan, and it's good to be back. And again, we have a situation where the former president is insulting the people of the state, this time saying that auto workers, that their important and good and highly skilled work could be performed by a child, which is just further evidence that Donald Trump comes from a place where he really does not appreciate or understand how most people in our country work very hard for all that they have, and that there is great dignity in their work. In addition, I've been hearing reports that his team at least is saying he's suffering from exhaustion. And that's apparently the excuse for why he's not doing interviews. And of course, he's not doing the CNN town hall. He refuses to do another debate. And, look, being president of the United States is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world. And so we really do need to ask if he's exhausted being on the campaign trail. Is he fit to do the job? And I think that's a question that is an open-ended question that he needs to answer. Thank you all.
There's a lot of, you're in a state where there's a lot of opposition to you from pro-Palestinian voters. In light of the recent news this week in the Middle East, does your message to them change? What's your message to them in the final few weeks?
Well, my message remains, first of all, we have got to end this war. And I think that what has happened now with the killing of Sinwar creates an opportunity for us to end this war and bring the hostages home. And I think everyone wants this war to end, and this is an opportunity to actually get there.
Explain why sort of the race still remains incredibly tight. I know you've been out campaigning. What's your sort of thesis of the case for why it remains so tight?
Look, it's an election for President of the United States. It's not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone. There are very important issues at play, and I am clear, and I think the people that you hear right now in the background are clear, that Donald Trump is unfit for the office, he is unstable, and he frankly is a danger to our democracy, as has been described by his former Chief of Staff, Secretaries of Defense, National Security Advisor, and former Vice President.
Caitlin, go ahead. One more question.
The former president has been critical of you not attending the Al Smith dinner last night. As you were talking about him being exhausted, do you think that that's one reason why he chose to live in New York City rather than come out here on the campaign trail?
Well, I'm beyond getting into the head of Donald Trump, but I will say that it should be a concern if he can't handle the rigors of the campaign trail. Is he fit to do the job? I think it's a legitimate question.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee in Grand Rapids, Michigan, speaking to reporters before a rally. Donald Trump, the Republican presidential nominee and former president, also campaigning today in Michigan, in and around Detroit, and he spoke to reporters as he landed at the airport.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Joe. We're going to have a good tour today of Detroit and other places. I hear we're leading in Michigan. We're leading in Pennsylvania. I hear we're doing really well. Hello, how are you? It's been a while. We're good. I hear we're doing very well in just about every location. I think we're doing great in Arizona. And Nevada, we're doing very well. So I guess you see that. That's why you're here. And we're going to have a little fun today. We're doing a speech at the end. And it's been very good. It's been very, very good. Well, my reaction is he was not a good person. That's my reaction. That's sometimes what happens.
How do you think this affects the border? Kamala Harris said she thinks you're exhausted. That's why you're canceling events. Are you exhausted?
What event did I cancel? I haven't canceled. She doesn't go to any events. She's a loser. She doesn't go to any events. She didn't even show up for the Catholics last night at the hotel. It was insulting. All they are is sound bites. So today I was at Fox and Friends at 7 in the morning. I then went to 2 different other appearances. I then made about 15 phone calls. I've gone 48 days now without a rest. And I've got that loser who doesn't have the energy of a rabbit. Let me tell you something. She should have been last night with the Catholics. So all they do is put out sound bites. Tell me when you've seen me take even a little bit of a rest. Not only am I'm not even tired. I'm really exhilarated. You know why? We're killing her in the polls because the American people don't want her. She didn't pass her bar exam. She's not a smart person. She's not a person that should represent our country. So I just want to let you know that very clearly. Go ahead.
Does the death of Sinwar make peace easier or more difficult?
I think it makes it easier.
Why is that?
Are you going to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu about it?
He's called me, yes.
What was that conversation?
He's called me. I have not spoken. I'm going to speak to him probably now.
What are you going to tell him?
Well, look, he's doing a good job. Biden is trying to hold him back. Just so you understand, Biden is far superior to the VP. He's trying to hold him back And they probably should be doing the opposite, actually. I'm glad that Bibi decided to do what he had to do, but it's moving along pretty good. Everything's moving along. Yes, you have You mean deranged Jack Smith? He's a deranged lunatic who lost Florida, is losing everything he's doing. He should have never been put in charge of this case. There is no case. I did absolutely nothing wrong. He's a deranged person. You know what it is? It's called election hunting. That's all they're doing, election hunting. It's the weaponization of the justice system. And the people are wise to it. Nothing was released. There's nothing released. In Florida, he said the same thing, and he lost the case soundly. And he'll keep losing the case. He's got no case. All they're trying to do is anything they can do to help them with the election because they're losing very badly. And the American public is totally aware of what's happening.
Many claim that millions of undocumented immigrants are here in the swing states to vote for them. What do you say?
Yeah, Kamala has allowed 21 million people at least, probably more than that, to enter our country. Many of them are murderers, they're drug dealers, they're people we don't want. They're terrorists a lot. We have the largest number of terrorists in our country right now that we've ever had, according to the records. All allowed by the worst border security in history, and that's Kamala. She was the border czar. I watched her make a fool out of herself on Bret Baier. She was the border czar. She doesn't know what she's doing. This is a woman that doesn't have a clue. Frankly, I think they should put back Biden. And now, based on the numbers, I think I'm doing better against her than I am against Biden. So maybe Biden will go back. They'll do it a third time.
Donald Trump, presidential candidate, Republican, and former president, with reporters at the airport in Detroit as he got ready during the day to do some events in Auburn Hills and in Detroit itself. He referenced this in one of the answers about that evidence released today in the January 6th federal case. This from Roll Call. A federal judge in Washington on Friday made public a mixture of miscellaneous documents filed as evidence by prosecutors in the criminal case against former President Donald Trump over his push to overturn his loss in the 2020 election. Despite the disclosure, hundreds of pages in the new filing from special counsel Jack Smith were blank and listed as remaining under seal, and many of the viewable pages included an array of information already available to the public, such as social media posts by Trump. In other places, dark redaction bars block some of the information. Still, the documents released in 4 volumes underscore the breadth of the special counsel's election interference case and the information on which prosecutors could rely in prosecuting the former president. That was from Roll Call. In a story today from Washington Times, former President Donald Trump says he will lobby conservative news tycoon Rupert Murdoch not to run negative ads or bring people on the airwaves that might spread falsehoods about his campaign. Mr. Trump previewed a planned Friday meeting with the News Corp leader, whose empire includes Fox News Channel, at the end of an interview on the couch at Fox and Friends. Mr. Trump said of his intended message for Mr. Murdoch, "Don't put on the negative commercials for 21 days, and don't put on, there are horrible people who come on and lie." That was from Washington Times. And Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday nights, watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, a weekly roundup of C-SPAN's campaign coverage, providing a one-stop shop to discover what the candidates across the country are saying to voters, along with first-hand accounts from political reporters, updated poll numbers, fundraising data, and campaign ads. Watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or download as a podcast on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or wherever you get your podcasts. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A headline at Michigan Advance: Slotkin and Rogers battle for Michigan's first open U.S. Senate seat in a decade. And the subhead: both bring considerable national security experience but have clashed on abortion, immigration, and the economy in a big spending race that could determine control of the U.S. Senate. The candidates are Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat, and former Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican. In a couple of minutes, we will talk with a Punchbowl News congressional reporter in Michigan about this race. First, here are the candidates in their final debate on Monday on the subject of EVs.
In our competition with China, are we investing too much in battery plants and EVs that a majority of consumers are not willing to purchase yet? You have 60 seconds, Ms. Locken.
Sure. Look, I don't care what kind of car you want to drive. I don't drive an EV. I live on a dirt road, on a farm. That's not likely in my future. But if the fundamental question is who do we want to make that next generation of vehicles, you better believe I want that to be Michigan and not China. Right now, everyone knows China is eating our lunch on these kind of vehicles. Just go to Europe, they have 30% market share. Go to South America, 30% market share. And America knows that we haven't always gotten it right when it comes to seeing that next generation of vehicles. In Michigan, in the 70s and 80s, we didn't think anyone would drive anything but a big vehicle. We saw these little, very fuel-efficient vehicles. We poo-pooed them. And then the Japanese came in and ate our lunch. The Koreans came in and ate our lunch. I don't want to miss that next generation. And by the way, it also means saving auto jobs. It means making sure that plants like Lansing Grand River, in the heart of my district, in Lansing, Michigan, we save the 700 jobs that are at that plant because we're upgrading it. So I don't care what you want to drive, but I want to build them.
Thank you, Ms. Locken. I'll repeat the question for you, Mr. Rogers. Are we investing too much in battery plants and EVs that a majority of consumers are not willing to purchase yet? Yeah. You have 60 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. And this is really important. What a candidate says and what they do when they're in office for the last 5 years, really, really important. Voted for the EV mandate at least 3 times. And as soon as about 4 weeks ago, doubled down on her position on EV mandates. I'm telling you, it is ruining our car industry. 5,000 auto dealers wrote an open letter to the Biden administration and said, you are killing the car business. Please stop with the EV mandates. And so if you think about what's happening, they mandated you have to drive that car, and my opponent signs an NDA that allows a Chinese battery company to go to outside of Goshen in order to facilitate her votes on EV mandates. Same with the $500 million rebuild at the GM factory. You're promoting Chinese technology in America. It's wrong. Let's go to hybrids. People are buying them. You don't have to mandate that they drive them.
Michigan U.S. Senate debate from Monday between former Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican, and current Congresswoman Elisa Slotkin, Democrat. And Punchbowl News Congressional reporter Max Cohen joins us now from Michigan covering this race. Thanks for being with us. So we've got an open seat, a battleground state in the presidential race, 2 well-known candidates. I can see why this is getting a lot of attention. Where does it stand?
Thanks for having me. It is an incredibly close race at the moment. I think Slotkin probably has a slight edge. Polling averages have her up around 2 points over Mike Rogers, but this thing is tightening. The best example of that is the top Senate GOP super PAC, Senate Leadership Fund, is announcing plans to spend $10 million in the race's final weeks to boost Rogers. Slotkin has outraised Rogers all cycle. She's been dominating the airwaves, but Republicans clearly think this race is tight enough to invest some major money here at the end.
And what issues have been driving the debate?
Sure, I think it's Michigan, so the auto industry is obviously top of mind. The push for electric vehicles has completely dominated this, I would say. Democrats are getting hammered constantly by Republicans. They're saying Democrats want to force Michiganders to buy electric vehicles. They say Democrats want to farm jobs overseas to China. So this has Democrats on the defense. I've talked to Democrats up and down the ballot here. Every single question I ask about EVs, the first thing they say to me is, look, we don't care what kind of car you drive. They know that the push to EVs isn't necessarily 100% popular in the state, but the Democratic message is we just want to make sure whatever cars we're making, they're being made right here in Michigan. So that's the response from Democrats. I'd say the other main issue is going to be abortion rights. Michigan is a state that in 2022 voted overwhelmingly to codify the right to abortion in the state constitution. That was a great year for Democrats nationwide and in Michigan on this issue of abortion rights. However, it still remains to be seen whether voters have that same level of enthusiasm to vote for Democrats on the issue, given that it is now protected in the state of Michigan.
I mentioned that Michigan was a battleground state at the presidential level as well. What are the relationships between the candidates for U.S. Senate and Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? Are they close to them or are they running away from them?
It's a great question. Mike Rogers is attending events with Donald Trump. He's going to a roundtable and he's going to a rally in Detroit. Alyssa Slotkin has kept a bit more distance from Kamala Harris. Slotkin is a really interesting example of a Democrat who's won in tough races before by trying to distance herself a little bit from the national Democratic brand. And when I caught up with Slotkin this week, she said she's still concerned about how Harris is doing in the race, but she's very much hardened that Harris is spending time in Michigan. That's the overarching, I think, takeaway is that both presidential candidates, Trump and Harris, are almost camping out across the state, holding rallies, roundtables, going to union events. So Trump and Rogers, I'd say, are hand in hand. Slotkin still supports Harris strongly, but I think she's trying to create a bit of distance.
We're talking with Max Cohen from Punchbowl News. When President Joe Biden was running for re-election, still in the race, a lot was made of the Arab American voters in Michigan and the role of foreign affairs and how they may vote. Has that trickled down now to the Senate race at all?
It has. It really has. I think Alyssa Slotkin has faced questions all cycle over whether Muslim American, Arab American voters in Michigan will support Democrats. She was asked this very question at a campaign stop this week. And her response was, look, I won 61% of the vote in Dearborn. Dearborn is the center of the state's Muslim population. And there are certainly scores of Michigan residents who are angered by what they perceive as U.S. support for an unjust war in Gaza. And they don't support Israel is doing. But Slotkin made the point that even with these disagreements on foreign policy, the Democrat believes that these type of voters, the majority of them, will remember what happened under Donald Trump, who, of course, instituted a travel ban on Muslim-majority countries. She says they're going to be pragmatic, that these voters will end up coming home to Democrats and realize that the threat of Trump, the threat of Republicans in power, is an overwhelming factor rather than foreign affairs being the overwhelming factor in their vote.
Where are the candidates physically going in the state? What's been their pattern?
It's all over. Michigan is a pretty big state, so we've seen events happening in the west of the state, in Grand Rapids. I've been to a bunch of events in what they call central Michigan, mid-Michigan, in places like Flint and Midland and Saginaw County. They're also, of course, around the very vote-rich Detroit area and the Detroit suburbs, so Oakland County, Macomb County, and, of course, in center Detroit as well. So they're all over. Some will even go as far north to Traverse City, the Upper Peninsula. But I'd say the key areas I would focus on if you're watching this race is center of Detroit. That will be very interesting to see if Democrats can juice up support among black voters. There's been some talk that maybe some of these voters will sit out the election or maybe vote for Trump. And I'd also really watch the suburbs around Detroit because these areas in Macomb County are traditionally independent, more swingy, and that could determine the election.
And a final question, any ballot count issues? When reading stories about various states changing their rules, modifying how they plan to do this, anything happening in Michigan?
Nothing major in Michigan that I've heard from. I've talked to all the campaigns in the state, and what they did caution is, hey, don't expect to know exactly what happens on election night. That seems to be the norm nowadays in this era of tight elections and with substantial mail votes, right? So I think this is going to be a close election. We're not going to know right away. Likely we'll know the final result of Michigan in the statewide races perhaps 2 to 3 days after election night. So that's the one thing I'll say to listeners is it's going to be close and just be patient with the vote counting.
Max Cohen, Punchbowl News congressional reporter, joining us from Michigan. You can find his articles at punchbowlnews.com and on X at Max P. Cohen. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
The New Jersey U.S. Senate race this year is another open seat. The incumbent Democrat Bob Menendez not running for re-election. But in this case, the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter rates it a solid Democrat, expecting the Democratic candidate, Congressman Andy Kim, to beat the Republican nominee, Curtis Bashaw, who describes himself as a hotel entrepreneur, job creator, and preservationist. They debated on Tuesday, and the first question was about the economy.
Everyone seems to agree that affordability is what's on top of the mind for voters today. What do you think is driving this crisis, and what specifically can you do from your seat in the Senate?
Well, affordability is a huge issue. You know, I run a small business that has now grown to 1,000 employees. We know our utilities are more expensive. We know that the food that we buy in to serve in our restaurants is more expensive. And in all 21 counties of this state, I have heard that issue loud and clear from New Jerseyans. And so to me, the way we fix that is to cut back on our government spending. You know, we had to deal with the COVID crisis. this, and then we've kept doubling down by doing more and more expensive bills that have caused inflation. And I believe the best way to cure it isn't to spend more money, isn't to try to do price caps, isn't to try to have mandates or subsidies, but is to actually unshackle our businesses, let them grow, trust our business people, grow the economy, make it bigger.
What do you think is driving this issue or this crisis?
Well, look, I agree that we want to make sure that we're growing our economy, but we need to make sure we're growing it for everybody. You know, right now, biggest corporations in the world are growing exponentially, but we're seeing a lot of small businesses really struggling to make ends meet. We're seeing a lot of people not invested in the stock market. Over half our country is not invested in the stock market. Other things like that. We have a huge racial wealth gap here in New Jersey, $300,000 wealth gap. You know, we see how it affects the Black community, the Latino community, Asian American communities. You know, there's a lot more that we need to be doing. Look, you know, that's why I took steps to be able to lower prescription drug costs, for instance. You know, something that was one of my biggest legislative wins, being able to cap out-of-pocket costs for seniors when it comes to their prescription drugs at $166 a month, capping insulin costs at $35 a month. We're trying to do that for all Americans. But look, you know, other things that we did, we passed the child tax credit, something that cut child poverty in half in this country just in 1 year. You know, these are proven tools, but the Republicans in Congress got rid of all of these different efforts that we were trying to do to help people through these difficult times. So, you know, these are some of the things we're trying to fix.
Congressman Andy Kim, Democrat, debating businessman Curtis Bashaw, Republican, New Jersey U.S. Senate debate from Tuesday. Story from Axios. Oregon's 5th congressional district race is shaping up to be a key battleground in the fight for a majority in the U.S. House of Representatives next year, with Democrats hoping to flip the seat blue following a narrow GOP win in 2022 after statewide redistricting. While the district has historically been a swing area, it stretches from southeast Portland down near Eugene and east toward Bend. The outcome on Election Day could have national implications, political experts tell Axios. A new poll conducted by Noble Predictive Insights found incumbent Republican Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer and Democratic challenger state lawmaker Janelle Bynum in a dead heat, each polling at 42% and 43% respectively. 14% of voters surveyed were undecided. That was reporting from Axios. Those two candidates debated on Tuesday. Here are their closing statements. Janelle Bynum went first.
I think we've heard tonight that I am the candidate that can represent Oregon's 5th congressional district best. I'm a mother of 4, a small business owner, an electrical engineer, and a 4-term state legislator. I am the one that has looked at bills protecting working families, making sure that we're standing up for Oregonians. We're investing in the economy. We're protecting the vulnerable. I am the champion for health care. I am a champion making sure that we have access to reproductive care. My opponent cannot say that she supports full choice for women. She cannot say that. She wouldn't respond to that. I'm the candidate that can tell you I've invested in mental health care resources. I'm the candidate that can tell you that I invested in Oregon's economy to the tune of $43 billion in economic investment. I am the candidate that is a champion of the people. I am the candidate that reaches across the aisle and will work with anyone to get things done. I'm Janelle Bynum, and I'm running for Oregon's 5th congressional district.
Congresswoman.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having us again. There's a couple of things I want to address just because we didn't get to them tonight. And when we talk about an opinion piece that's come out of my opponent's mouth about me versus a proven factual track record, there's 2 things that I think that she's failed to address. One, the support of labor. 20 unions have supported me. That used to support her, and they walked away because they don't believe her and they don't trust her, and she has failed policies. Law enforcement, they have walked away and very voraciously said they would not support her in any sort of way with public safety. And last but not least, we saw over this last week, her fail, a young woman She's
That
a
is not
mandatory
true.
reporter.
That is not true.
And she decided
not true.
to not
That is not
report it
true.
to law
I will keep
enforcement.
talking over you
and
because
she
you are lying.
unfortunately did
That
not
is not
protect
true,
that
and
young
you will
woman
not
who
repeat
deserved
that
to
lie
be
in front of my
protected.
face.
And so I find it very unfortunate that she lies often.
You are
and not
a liar.
protecting our young women.
You are the Trump supporter.
We are
the
moms.
person who is making sure that
we are
Trump
moms,
makes it to
and we
the
have a
top.
mom
Representative,
code.
let's just let her finish.
And when we have a mom,
She's lying.
we're moms and we have
Her
a
time
mom
is up.
code. She decided not to support that young woman, and that's
She's
really
a liar.
disgrace to
And we are
moms
out of
in
time.
Oregon.
Thank
we are
you.
out of time.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you so much.
A debate between Congresswoman Lori Chavez DeRemer, Republican, and Oregon State Representative Janelle Bynum, Democrat, during Tuesday's debate for Oregon's 5th Congressional District seat, one of the U.S. House races the Cook Political Report calls a toss-up. Poll so close, there's no favorite to win. You can find all of C-SPAN's Campaign 2024 coverage, U.S. House and U.S. Senate debates, and the presidential campaign trail rallies and meet and greets at our website, cspan.org. And finally, the Japanese newspaper Mainichi Shimbun writes that the United States on Thursday hosted an official dinner to honor architects of the U.S.-Japan relationship, with the second-ranking diplomat at the State Department saying, "We have a high confidence that there is a deep well of bipartisan support for the long-standing bilateral alliance." Less than 3 weeks before the U.S. presidential election, a total of 100 former and current senior officials, as well as scholars from both sides, gathered at the department's top-floor formal reception room to celebrate the increasing strength of the relationship over the course of a few decades. That was the article from the Japanese newspaper. One of those in attendance, the U.S. ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel. That was Thursday night. Today, he was at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, talking about U.S.-Japan relations. An audience member asked what he wished he had done in the past few years, but didn't.
One of the themes of the conversations today, it's not just looking at what's happening now, it's also reflecting on the past, things that happened. And I think everybody in this room is well aware of the incredible accomplishments of the past 3 years, but also things that perhaps didn't happen that we might have wanted to. Looking back on the past few years in your position, can you identify for us any things that could have been, that you would have liked to have happened, but for whatever reason they haven't happened? And I'll just add, yet. Thank you.
Can I have my microphone back?
Yes.
Okay. Now it won't work again. And this is not just the alliance. This is a challenge for the United States. I kind of outlined this the other day in the Wall Street Journal, but look, I think our security posture, you can say we're making major changes. We have a theory of the case. You could say you should do this, you should do it. We have a theory of the case and we're executing. I think on the diplomatic and political side, same thing. I think our international economic statecraft is not where it needs to be. It's the weak link in the system. And I'm not talking about trade, because the moment you say that here in America, everybody puts their Braveheart paint on and you can never get a conversation. It's international economic statecraft and energy. And we as a country, and it's not just here, but you could say it also in the European theater, just overall, we as a country went from all trade is good, which clearly wasn't true, to all trade is bad, which is also clearly not true. And we have to figure it out from a strategic standpoint, an economic standpoint, and fully aware that what happened over the last 30 years did not work, and we outran the United States public. And you can't have a foreign policy if the public's not going to support it. And so, but our weak link, and I say this as a father of 2 kids in the Navy, who I happen to think the people that join the armed forces are the true 1% in this country. The 1% is not people that acquire things. The 1% is the people that give something of themselves. It is wrong to ask those kids to execute a policy and to have your staffs throughout the State Department, throughout all your international agencies doing what they're doing, and then have the international economic statecraft run a distant third piece. So we as a country, before we even get to the region, have to come to some theory of the case. And again, as somebody that's been pretty upfront about my views of the way China's operating, you have to have a theory of the case, and the 3 things that have influenced it are COVID, the conflict in Europe, and the coercion by China. I call it the 3 C's that fundamentally upended the last 30 years. And we have not structurally come to conclusions. So you can't execute something until you know what you want to execute. And it's not just trade. Trade is a piece of a larger theory of the case. And those three things, security, political/diplomatic, and economic, if they're aligned right, I think we have the right deterrence vis-a-vis China, not only in the region, but around the globe. And you're not going to do it in 3 years, but we have to have an internal discussion so we can then start to execute. And that's what I would say.
U.S. Ambassador to Japan Rahm Emanuel today at CSIS in Washington, D.C., the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's been in that position since March 2022. In his career, he's also been a member of Congress, Democrat from Illinois, the mayor of Chicago, and the White House Chief of Staff to President Obama. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 36, NASDAQ up 115, S&P up 23. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.